Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of 3D Prototyping in Unity. My name is Kasanas. In the last episode, we went through and physically built ourselves several assets that will be used as obstacles. We built a rock, we built some crates that are physical-based obstacles, meaning they're going to fall based on physics, and we built ourselves a tank trap. Now, ultimately, the tank trap is supposed to damage our character. At the end of last episode, it wasn't doing so. In today's episode, we're going to write the code to make sure our character can get hurt. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so in order for our character to be damaged, we're going to have to write a couple of scripts that are going to go hand in hand. We're going to write a script that is going to allow any enemy, so we want to write something that's general enough, that we can put it on any of our enemies or any of our obstacles. We want to write something that can damage, that's going to go on our enemy, that can damage our player. And we have to write a script, a secondary script, obviously, that's going to track our character's health. Okay? So let's start off with the soldier, with the actual character's health. And what we want to do right away, we're going to go down here, and we are going to add a new component. We're not going to add it to our existing player controller. We're going to add a brand new script. So add component, go down to new script. Again, it's a C# script, and let's call this thing here player, let's call it small p, player health. Player health. All right, there we go. And I'm going to double click to open it up. And there we go. There's our player health script. Now, there's a number of things we're going to need in our player health script in order to be able to know how much damage our character can take and how much damage they currently have. So this is not going to be a complete script either. We're going to make updates to the script as we move forward throughout this series. We're going to start off with a very basic script right now that allows our character to take damage and be killed. But we're not going to go into all the details of it right now. We're just going to add the stuff that allows the character to take damage, like I said, and be killed. And later on episodes, we're going to add things like sound effects and damage indicators and that kind of thing. All right? So to start off with, we have to know, first of all, we want a public, and public means it's going to be available to us in the inspector. So later on, we can make changes to this and adjust our game. So public, it's going to be a float, and we're going to call this thing here, let's call it full health. And full health is going to be the maximum health that our character actually has. The next thing we're going to create is called float. It's going to be a float again, and it's going to be current health. And the current health is going to be the current state of our character. All right? And to start off with, let's go down and do our start, and let's immediately say that our current health is going to start off equal to our full health. And that's up to you. I mean, if you don't want it, if you want your character to start off damaged in some way, then that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. You don't necessarily have to, but if you want to, you can. All right, boom. Let's go like that. Now, so that's all lined up. Now, with that in place, what we really want to do is we're going to want to do a couple of different things. We want our obstacle to have the ability, or not just our obstacle, but our enemy, to have the ability to actually damage our player. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to go down below update, add a couple of lines. Let me make this a little bigger so you guys can see it, because I know there was a couple of people saying, please make it bigger, and I keep forgetting. Zoom in, view, zoom in, view, zoom in. And this stuff is all in HD, guys. So if you're having a hard time seeing it, then you can also watch it in full screen, and you should be able to see the code pretty clearly. All right, so what we want to do is we want to add a public void function down here. And this thing we're going to call add damage. And a public void function, a public function allows other objects to call the public function as long as they have access to the player health script. So later on, we're going to give our enemy or our obstacles access to this player health script and the ability to call this public void add damage function. And it's going to take one parameter. It's going to take a float, and we'll just call it damage. All right, and that's the amount of damage that the actual object does to our character. And there's not a lot that has to happen in here. Not a lot that has to go in here. First thing that has to happen is our current health is going to be equal to minus equals damage. And that's just a short form of saying current health is equal to current health minus damage. That's just a short form of saying that. And so that's going to remove the amount of damage that the obstacle has done from our character's current health. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure if our character is dead. All right, because if they keep taking damage, eventually they're going to die. So we're going to say if, and we're going to say current health, current health is less than or equal to, it's up to you, 0. That means our character is dead. As far as I'm concerned, he is dead. Bam, bam, bam. I've got my curly braces in there. Now, if the character dies, I'm going to call another function. This one here doesn't have to be a public function, but I'm going to make it one. I'm going to make it a public function just simply because if I decide later on that something can have instant death or cause instant death on my character, then I want to be able to trigger this as well. So I'm going to call a function that I'm going to call make dead. And it doesn't currently exist, obviously, so it's going to give us an error. I'm going to go down below here, bam, bam, bam. And I'm going to create that function. And like I said, I'm going to make it a public void function again, make dead. Just like that. Bam, bam, bam. Remember your curly braces. Now, the make dead function, really and truly, all I want it to do, I want it to do a couple of different things, first of all. I want it to obviously destroy my game object. All right, and I'm going to say the game, this is on the top layer, so game object is perfectly fine. That's all it really has to do, is destroy the actual game object. This is all that function really needs to do. And what I'd ultimately like to do is add some kind of death effects, which we'll take a look at the end of this episode. And for now, I won't. I'm just going to say file, and I'm going to say save. All right, and that's all that this really needs to do right now. Okay, if I've done everything correctly, I go back over here, and I find my soldier, and I scroll down, I'm going to see that I've got my player health script in there, and I should have a public variable associated with it, my full health. And let's give him a full health of, 30. It doesn't really matter. Later on, you guys can make adjustments to this, obviously, because it's easily available right there in the inspector. So great. Now what we've got to do is we have to add the ability for the actual obstacle to damage our character. So let's go over to our tank trap, and we're going to go into the top layer of the tank trap right here. And we're going to add a component. Once again, it's a brand spanking new script. It's a C# script. Let me enunciate that because I'm slurring my words here. And let's call it enemy damage. All right, bam. And this is a script that we're going to use frequently on all of our different enemies. All right, and once again, it's something that we're going to add. Oh, I hate that error. Do that and do this. All right, it's going to be something that we're going to make updates to a little bit later on. For now, let's add a couple of different things. The first thing that we're going to add a couple of different variables. The first thing is our public float, and it's going to be how much damage that this thing can actually do. All right, so that's the total amount of damage that this thing can do. Now, because the way that we have this thing set up is whenever our character enters within a certain area, that's how this worked before. Whenever our character enters within a certain area, we want damage to start occurring, and we can make calls to our on trigger stay, and if we do that, then it'll staying. It's going to be looking at it every single frame. We don't want that to be the case. We want it to only do damage periodically, every so often. All right, so we're going to add in here something called damage rate. And damage rate is how often we can actually apply the damage to our character. All right. The next one we're going to add is a public, and it's going to be a float again. And what we want to do is we want to set it up so that whenever our character enters within the range of damage, we want our character to be thrown off or thrown away from the damage location. All right. So we're going to add something called pushback force, and this pushback force is going to be a force that we actually apply to the character whenever it enters within our damage zone. Okay, now we're going to have to add a few more variables in here. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to add something that's called it's going to be a float, and it's going to be called next damage. And next damage. Damage rate is how often damage can occur, and next damage is the actual time when the next damage can occur. Now, we're going to have to do something here that's a little bit different. Now, if we go back and we take a look at our tank trap, we have tank trap set up, so we've got our tank trap on top, and let me just drag this up so it's near the top, right there. we have our tank trap set up, and then we have our tank trap surface. And tank trap surface was a collider we set up to be ground and allows our character to stand on top of our actual thing. Now the problem is, what we've got in here is we've got ourselves on tank trap, we've got ourselves this trigger. And the trigger itself is shootable, so we can shoot it, and whenever the character goes into this trigger area, that's when the damage is going to be applied. And we have, as I mentioned previously, we have 3 options. Whenever the character first enters, we can do damage. Whenever the character stays within this area, we can do damage. And whenever the character exits, we can do something. The problem, of course, is we've got nested colliders. And in 2D, this was never a problem. But in 3D, I'm having a problem with it. Having these nested colliders within 3D is giving me an issue. So what we're going to do is instead, let's go back to our code. Instead, what we're going to do, instead of using the on trigger stay, which is where we're getting the issue. On trigger stays, we're getting the issue because we have an object that's always staying within there and always triggering this. What we want to do instead is we're going to set up a new thing that we're going to call a bool. That's going to be a bool, sorry. And we're going to say player in range. And we're going to set that equal to false to start off with. False. Oops, spelled it right though. False. Now, what we're going to use is this bool is going to tell us whether or not our character is still within our actual collider. All right, that's our plan. So as long as the character is still in the actual collider, we're going to do damage, and if not, then we're going to stop doing damage. All right, and we're going to use that bool to do it instead of the on trigger stay. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a reference to a game object, and it's going to be the player itself. And we need this so that we can find the player health script. And we're going to get a player health script, and we're going to call it the player health. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to need a reference to our player health script, as we talked about before. We need a reference to our player health script in order to call the public functions available there, either the make dead or the add damage. All right, so in our start, I think that's all we need for now. In our start, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our next damage, oops, I hit caps, next damage equal to 0f. And the reason why is because I want the player to be able to be damaged immediately by whatever object this is. Okay? And so setting out to actually, we're going to set it to time. Not 0f. We'll set it to time, dot time. And when we do this, what that's basically doing is whenever this thing comes into existence, it's going to set it to that exact time, whenever this thing first comes into existence. So that's how we're going to do it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually get our reference to the player. The player is going to be equal to the game object. Capital G, sorry, is going to be equal to the game object. So we're going to be looking for the game object, dot find, and we're going to be looking for it with a particular tag. Find game object with tag. And if you remember correctly, we've already labeled our character as the player. That was a tag we gave it. So what this function does is it goes through and it finds the game object that's in our scene that has the tag player, and it puts it into, so we have a reference right here to our player itself. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say the player health is going to be equal to the player, which we've already got a reference to, dot get component, and we're going to get component, and we're looking for player health. All right, in doing so, where is my, there it is. In doing this, what we're basically doing is we are, first of all, getting a reference to the actual player. Afterwards, we are getting a reference to the player health script, so we can actually go through and call the appropriate public scripts from our actual player. Now, I've mentioned that we have 3 opportunities to be able to do something to our character whenever the character enters within our attack range. So, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to use a void on trigger enter. The void on trigger enter, and it takes one variable, a collider, and we'll simply call it other. Bam, bam. Make sure you guys put in your curly braces because that often adds issues. Let me add some returns in here. All right, so the on trigger enter. Really and truly, we don't want this to do a whole lot. We want to, first of all, check if it's actually our player that's came into within this attack range. So if other.tag equals quotations player, then we want something to happen. And what do we want to happen? Basically, what we've decided is we're going to set it up so that player in range is going to be equal to true. All right, and that means that the player is actually within our area. And like I said, the reason I'm doing this is because there has been an issue with these, and maybe it's already fixed, I don't know. There was an issue with nested colliders in 3D. I wrote this originally on 5.1, and it's currently Unity's currently on 5.2.2. So maybe they've already corrected this issue, and if they have, then you don't have to go through this rigmarole. If they haven't, then this works really, really well. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is on trigger enter, we're going to say that the player is in range, and void on trigger exit. And then once again, it takes a collider that we'll call other, and put in our curly braces. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. If it's our player that's leaving, I'm going to copy this. If it's actually our player that's leaving, then we want to set our player in range to false. So by having true or false, by having this Boolean available to us, we don't actually have to use the onTrigger stay event. And this is how I got around that issue. Now, there's a couple things that we actually want to happen then. If our player's in range, we want to cause damage, right? That's our ultimate goal. If the player's in range, then we're going to cause damage. So we're going to write that in the update. Bam. If player in range, then what we're going to do is we're going to write a new function called attack, and that way we can make changes to it as we go through. So attack. Let's write our new function that we're going to call attack. So it's going to be a void attack, and it's not going to take any variables, and we're going to add in our curly braces, just like that. All right, so the attack, what do we want to happen? First of all, we have to check and see if we can even damage this player. If we can't, we want to get out right away. So if, and only if, our next damage is less than or equal to the current time. So that means we've already passed by when we can next do our damage. Remember at the top we set it up so that we had our next damage time. If we've gone past that, then we can actually physically add damage to the player. Now, we already set it up so that we've got our player component, the player health component, all right, from the player itself. We want to use that now in order to cause damage. So the player health dot add damage, and that was what the add damage was, the function that was available to us that we wrote. And we're going to add the amount of damage, all right, and that is the variable we set up at the top. And then what we want to do is we want to say, so that takes care of itself. So once we've added the damage, it goes to the player health script, it finds the add damage function, and it adds the damage, and everything's taken care of over there. In this one, what we want to do, however, is we want to set the next damage time, because we don't actually want it to happen over and over and over again, all right? And it's going to be equal to time, and plus the damage rate, which we set up above. And that's going to make sure that we are only damaging the character when we're supposed to, all right, after the damage rate has occurred. All right, the last thing we want to do is we want to apply the pushback. And we haven't written this function yet either, so pushback, it's going to be an actual function called pushback, not pushback force, so don't click on that, don't autocomplete it, which I just did. Pushback is going to be pushback, and this is going to be a function, like I said, we're going to write it, and it's going to take one variable, it's going to take what we're pushing back. And in our case, we're going to push back the player.transform. That's what we're actually going to be pushing on. All right, we're going to be trying to find the rigid body on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to write pushback. So add our semicolon in there, go below attack, add a couple of spaces, and we're going to add our void pushback function, and it's going to take a single transform variable, and we're going to call it a pushed object. I guess it doesn't really matter what you call it. Object. All right, bam, bam, and bam. Let's move down so you guys can see. All right, so the pushback function is also very, very simple. The first thing we want to do is figure out which direction we're pushing. All right, and we're going to be pushing in a vector 3 and let's call it push direction. Push direction is fine, and it's going to be equal to a new vector 3, and it's going to have no component at all in the x. We're not going to put anything in the x at all. Interesting. Comma, and then we're going to add a pushback direction. A pushback direction in the y. So it's basically going to push our character straight up in the air, and our pushback is going to be our pushed object dot position dot y minus the transform of our current object. So the transform, small tree transform. Hate it when it gives me a big T all the time. Small t transform dot position dot y. So it's basically finding out the difference between the actual object's position and our transform position is. And the last thing is obviously our z value, which is going to be 0. We don't want anything being pushed on the z at all, ever. All right, lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to normalize this, dot normalized, and that's going to give us a unit vector. All right, now we want to multiply this, our push direction. We want to multiply our push direction times equal. So once again, this is just a short form of saying push direction is equal to push direction times. So times equal our pushback force, which we've added above. And this is the actual force that we've applied above. It's a variable that we can change as much as we want. So that's taking our normalized vector and multiplying it by that actual force to give us an appropriate amount of force to actually push the object. All right, now what we're going to try and find is the rigid body of the pushed object. So we're going to declare a rigid body, and we'll call it pushed RB. It doesn't really matter what you call it. Is going to be equal to our pushed object dot get component. Obviously, we're going to use our get component just like we always do. Get component, and obviously we are looking for a rigid body. Boom, boom, these two and that. All right, so once we actually have access to our rigid body, we can apply the force. So now our push RB, where is it? Pushed RB, dot velocity. The first thing we're going to do is zero it out so we don't have any velocity anymore. It's going to be equal to vector 3 dot 0. And this is just, again, a short form of saying new vector 3, 0, 0, 0. All right, so what we're basically doing is zeroing out any of the velocity that this character had before, whatever the rigid body was, whatever it had before. We're zeroing it out, and we're applying a brand new force, and that's going to be our pushed RB dot add force, bam, add force, and we are going to add it in our push direction, and we're going to do it as a force mode. We're going to do it as a force mode dot impulse, and that means just add kind of an explosive force, so it's all being applied at the same time. Bam! All right, so with that stuff done, I think that's all we need to do. Yep, okay, with all that done, I'm going to say save, file, save, and if I've got everything correct on here, then this actual thing should work. I don't. I have an actual problem. I'll have to take a look and see what it is, and I'll be right back. Okay, guys, it was a very, very simple error. Whenever you have an if statement like this, you cannot have a single equal signs. That's an equate function, and you don't want to do that. You have to have a double equal signs to make sure there's a comparison going on, all right? Double equal signs. So I'm going to file, and I'm going to save that. Now, if we do everything correct, when we come back into here, we should have within our actual player, inside of our actual tank trap, we should have a number of things. We should have all of our public variables be available to us, and they are. So currently, my player has a total health of 30. Let's make it do 10 damage. Let's make the rate 0.5, and let's make our pushback force 10. All right. One last thing I want to check, make sure I've done this. I haven't. Our soldier player, make sure that your soldier is actually tagged as the player. All right, if you haven't tagged as the player, nothing's going to work. Okay, so now when I play this, theoretically, with everything being done, I should be able to jump on here, be damaged, I'm being pushed back, and then killed. So it hit me 3 times, and then I died. And you can ignore this thing here. This is there's always going to be an error here. I didn't put any error checking in for the camera yet, and the camera itself is still looking for our player transform, which has been destroyed. So let's take a look at that again. If I jump on, boom, 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 I am dead. Great. That's exactly what we want to happen. Let's clear this. I don't want to see your errors. That is awesome. That's exactly what we want to happen. Now, the last thing I want to do today, the last thing I want to do in this episode is make sure that we have some kind of visual representation of what's happened to our character, all right? So this is going to be a very, very brief review of simplistic particles. Okay, so let's make a death effect for our player. Okay, so the last thing I want to do in this episode is create a player death effect. So when our player dies, there's kind of going to be this explosion of gore. And not really gore, kind of cartoony gore. You guys have already seen it in the game. So when the player dies, we're going to have this explosion of bloody drops. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our materials. And we're going to create a brand new material. Let's go create material. Bam. Let's call this thing here blood. Let's call it player blood material. Player blood material. And what we're going to do is we're not going to use a standard. We're going to use the unlit transparent cutout because I've got some red circles that we're going to use in here. Red. Well, it's supposed to be red circles. Looks like a red square. But we can see down here that it's actually a red circle. So that's awesome. And that's all we want to do. That's fine. The next thing we want to do is come over here. We're going to say create. We're going to say create particle system. And we're going to call this particle system right away. Let's call it player death effects. Basically, all we're doing is we're making a simplistic particle system. And you guys have already done this once. We've already made a simplistic particle system. And this is just basically a review. I'm going to reset this so it's all at 0. And I'm going to turn it so that it is splattering upwards like... you know what? I'm going to make it a hemisphere, I think. I think maybe we'll make it a hemisphere. I mean, they're going to make it splatter upwards with a cone. Oh, maybe I will. Maybe I'll do it with a cone. All right, so we're going to make this into -90, so it's moving upwards. Now, that's awesome. The next thing we're going to do, is we're going to change the duration, first of all. It's not going to be 5. It's going to be 1, so it's much faster. And let's go all the way down right away to the renderer and change it from our default ugly particle to our super sexy blood splatters right there. All right, cool. All right, so far so good. Basically, we're just going to make a few different changes here. First of all, let's go to the top again because obviously I don't like that. We're going to start off, we're not going to have it looping, but later on we're going to turn off looping, but we'll leave it on for now so we can actually see the thing we're building. Obviously no start delay. Let's say the start lifetime is going to be, let's make it between 2 values. Let's make it a constant between values between 0.5 and 1. Whoops. And 1. And we can make changes to this later on if we don't like it. Let's change the speed. Right now the start speed is 5. Let's make it, I like to make them constant between values. I always do this. Let's make it between 5 and 8, let's say. 5 and 8. So there's a fair amount of speed there. The start size, let's go again with a start size of between 2 values, between 0.25 and 0.5. All right, that gives us a little bit tighter, a little bit smaller blobs. And no rotation, no color. Let's change the gravity and give it a modifier of 1. So now the blobs themselves are going to shoot up in the air a little bit, and that's awesome. Let's go through and change a few different things here as well. Let's set it up so that we have a maximum, at any given time, maximum particles of 10. And let's set it up so that we have a rate of 50. So that means most of them are going to come out at once, all right? If you wanted to instead, you could simply have a burst. That would work just as well. It's up to you guys to decide how you want to do it. The burst would work just fine, and in the past, I know we used the burst. So let's go down to our shape now. Our cone angle of 25 is probably right. Let's leave all this as it is. That's perfectly fine. And you know what? That might be perfectly fine for our actual... That's all we really need to do. That's probably fine for our actual blood splatter. That's going to give me a nice little explosion. We might want to change our gravity a little bit so we get a little bit more. Let's change our gravity to 0.75 and see how that looks. That gives us a little bit more upward exploding blood. That's not so bad. That's not so bad. All right, let's leave it like that. And all we want to do now is take our player death effects, grab it in here, and we're going to drag it, and we're going to drop it into our prefabs. All right, so that way we can use it anytime we want, and we're going to delete it from our scene. One thing I want to do, player death effects, let's make sure we turn looping off, because we don't want it to actually loop. We want it to play once and then kind of be done. So it's basically going to play for 1 second and then kind of be done. So that's what I'm saying. If you wanted to, you could simply have had it set up to do a burst. Now, let's go back to our code, because we're going to have to make a few different changes to our actual code. In the past, now we already know when our player dies. If we go to our player health, bam, we already know when our player dies, right? We already have our make dead function. What we want to do now, we're going to add a couple of different things. We're going to actually add a link to our death effect. So let's go up in here. Let's go add a couple of lines, and we'll add a public game object, and we'll call this thing here, it doesn't really matter, we call it player, oops, I hit the wrong button, no, death effects, I did hit the wrong button, player death effects. Okay, and that's going to be a link to our actual effects that we just built, and it's public, so anytime I want, I can change what it is. Let's go down here and add some things. This is more in the center of the screen. Now, in our make dead, this is where we kill our character off. So basically, what we want to do, we're going to want to do something else as well. In our make dead, we're going to add an instantiation. Basically, we're going to instantiate we're basically just going to instantiate our actual effects that we just built. So, first thing we're going to do is instantiate, and instantiate, as you guys remember, just means make it, like put this thing in place. So we're going to instantiate our player. What do we want to instantiate? Our player death effects. And we want to put it at our transform. So the transform dot position. That's where we want it to be. Comma. And we want to do it with a quaternion. Quaternion. Let me see how I should do this here. Quaternion. Why isn't it showing up? Quaternion. There we go. Quaternion dot Euler. So basically, we're going to put in some Euler coordinates in here, and I want it to be a new vector 3, and we will call it minus 90, comma 0, comma 0. All right, and that's not enough brackets. That's enough brackets now. Bam. All right. So with that in place, I'm going to save this. File save. Perfect, and boom, and now I actually want to add in here in my player death effects that I created, my actual effects, I'm going to add a new component. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my destroy me script. All right, destroy me script to make sure that we destroy this guy after 1 second. All right, now when I hit play, oh no, I can't hit play yet. When I go to my soldier, boom, when I come in here, I should be able to see in my player health script, oh, there's an error. On line 30, let's see what it is. On line 30, instantiate player death effects. What am I missing? I'm missing something here. I'm missing one more of these. Bam. File save. All right, with that in place now, my player health script should, and there we go, should have my player death effects available. I'm going to drag and drop these guys in there. And now when I hit play, when I die, bam, we get our blood. I kind of got a double there. I want to change my actual player death effects. I think we had a duration of half a second, so let's make this 0.5 as well. So my alive time is actually equal to my actual death, my duration. 2, 3, boom. Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a relatively long one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. Just let me know down in the comments what you didn't like, and I will do my best to try and change it. All right, everyone? I love hearing from you. I can't wait to see your games. Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.